like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which we gather today, and I'm on Paroro and Yagara land in Brisbane. Thank you all for coming and visiting us in a virtual way, and I look forward to the afternoon.
Tēnā koe e te whaia o te aonei, nā mihi atu ki a koe, me ngā iwi kāinga o te rohe nei, ka nui te mihi atu ki a koutou, nā tangata tuatahi o Mijan, mihi atu ki a koutou. Kua tae mai i tēnei rōpū ki te whakahoki te mihi atu ki a koutou mō tēnei kōrero. Ko Huhana Smith tōku ingoa nō Ngāti Tukore he ahau. I am your host for today, but we are very honoured to be visitors on this country virtually as we are, but this group is most honoured to be here. I thought I'd just go around the group. I'll start with the artist Alex Monteith, and I'll just ask her, as we do in Aotearoa, New Zealand, no he koe, Alex, where are you from?
Ko Blue Stick te maunga, ko Durg te awa, ko Atlantic te moana, noi rani ahau, ko Ngā Pākehā te iwi. Kei te piha toko kāinga anaine, ko Alex Monteith toko ingoa, tēnā koutou. And so I'm from Ireland, where I mentioned that my moana there is the Atlantic. And currently though, I'm living at Piha, so I'm beaming into you and to this kōrero, this discussion from Kauaramaki lands. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you all and to be with the other artists and people working on the project.
Kia ora, Alex. Gerard O'Regan, no he koe e hoa. Where are you from?
Kia ora ana koutou. Ko aora ki te maoka, ko Waitaki te awa, ko tahupota ki te tupuna, ko tahupota ki te whare e tui te taha o te ara kiwa, kei awarua, ko enuku te whare e tui te taha o te taiawara tiuru kei Moiraki. Ko katiraki amo, katirua hiki ngā karakataka he mihi atu ki a koutou. Kia ora mai. So I'm from, I work at the Otago Museum as the curator Māori, but my bones are at Moiraki in North Otago and down in Bluff on the edge of Fovo Strait. So kaitahu is my iwi, kaitahu whānui, and it's been a pleasure to be involved in this kaupapa that relates back to our archaeology, our histories. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Gerard. Nā me ati kia koe. Kia koe hoki, Ron. No he koe. Where are you from?
Kia ora koutou. Ko taki timu rawa ko te whatawhata oku maka ko aparima te awa he reri atu ki te ara kiwa. Ka reri te wai o te ara kiwa ki te moana tā pokapoka a tāwhaki ki te mautiri titi o taka whanauka. Ko Kanawera, te ikua tēnei mautiri titi. Ko Rombu tōku ikua no ōraka hau. Yeah, so kia ora Huhana, koutou katoa ki a koe, Aunty Dale. Great to be here. The places that I'm from that generate my identity and the places I know who I am when I stand there are down on those Titi Islands, those Muttonbird Islands. That's right close to that great crashing Southern Ocean that flows down onto the ice. And that's what informs who I am. But it's great to be here today. Kia ora.
Oh, well, kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for addressing yourself from where you're from, because I think place is a really important part of our kōrero today. But I'd like to turn to Alex. We're going to have just a dialogue today, but Alex, if I could just turn to you and, you know, where did this project begin? It's a compelling project. It involves all these talents coming together, but where did this begin?
Ron, just you're mentioning there exactly what Ron mentioned, the huge seas that he just mentioned that are rolling through the Southern Ocean. I have a background in surfing, so I have continued in my academic life to wonder and want to go deeper into ecology and the concepts around ocean spaces. And of course, some of the biggest seas in Aotearoa are down in that far south area where the bottom of the globe has those continuous storms that go around uninterrupted, and they come up and they touch on the bottom of that area. And the beginning of the project is actually there on an open-ended question about the nature of currents and seas and the contemporary things that are happening that affect ecology. Broadly speaking, I was looking at the West Coast, and so I was thinking about those big seas and starting to think about where they were. And at the same time, there's another origin here, which is to do with also Mark Adams, who had been in Tamatea, and I'd seen his images of Tamatea Dusky Sound, and Mark was wanting to return to Tamatea actually for return work and to go on with the series that he was working on. And so a studio conversation with Mark really started the question of thinking about the area and about art. Very quickly though, a part of the way that I think about things is to kind of look at who are the people that are kind of interacting or relating to a place now in the contemporary and what's at stake. And another thread or a beginning of this project came through by chance when we were at a summer camp with Ngāti Porou artist Natalie Robertson, and we were up at Umaiwa on her whānau land there, and we were sitting around having a campfire conversation, and I mentioned to Richard about an interest that was beginning around that area of the coast, and Richard Anderson had been stationed there really looking at the conservation of kakapo, the endangered bird of that area in the 1960s and 70s. And I so wanted to hear what it was like really living in the area, watching for these birds and finding trace and sign. And through this chance conversation with Richard, who had worked there, he mentioned lots of stories about that mahi there, about that work there, and the nature of working like in a question of ecology in that era. And then he mentioned as well, while he was a young man there, that Peter Coates, who was a young archaeologist at the time, was also in the area, and a lot of material was moved out in boxes at that time. And Richard mentioned wondering what had happened to all of that material. So in a way, that's a long answer to the question of, it's a chance encounter with a story that started this journey that now spans 8 years.
I mean, these coastal incursions, coastal flows, coastal incursions, ka Paroro or Haumumu, is really important to the work that you do, Gerard, in regards to being a Māori curator with an archaeological background, kaitahu, you know, this is home, kind of home rohe in the wider sense. And for you, there's all these technicalities that run with the process of being an archaeologist. So what's that like from a Māori perspective in a way, knowing that this collection had been in a museum collection for such a long time? So what was this like for you?
I found the whole project one of wonderful re-engagement with Taoka. And one of the things as a curator, or a kaitiaki Māori, somebody who's been involved in curating Taoka and thinking about archaeology for a long time, one of the neat things about this project is how we're continually redefining what it is, or rethinking what it is that we're talking about when we talk about art, when we talk about archaeology, when we talk about Taoka. And so for me, one of the lovely things about this project has been going to taking or seeing sort of dusty old archaeology, bags of archaeological midden recovered from an archaeological site, stored in a museum, considered to be sort of a I don't know how would put it politely, but basically sort of a secondary part of a museum collection, you know, because it's not really taonga tuturu, it's not really those taonga that, or those treasures that are sort of at the fore of our museum galleries, but rather the dusty stuff at the back waiting for some future analysis. Well, here we were bringing these things out, re-engaging with them, and the stories that came through with it when we met in the Southland Museum and with Ethel Anderson, Matua Stewart Bull and others, and started looking at these dusty collections and actually getting excited about the stories that unfolded. And then, of course, taking those into an art gallery and tipping out these bags of dusty stuff in a nice, pristine white art gallery. It's sort of, I like the way it's been flipping those ideas around what taokara are, what art is, and actually harking back very much to sort of thinking about the people engagement around these things rather than necessarily what our particular categories are. And that is, I mean, that is something that in Australia, Aunty Dale, you have a lot with those re-engagements of traditional owners with your heritage sites, with your rock art, with the contemporary arts and so forth. But here in New Zealand, sort of sometimes our archaeology is sort of kind of kept a little bit more separate than the closeness it's kept with over in Oz. Yeah. So that's one of the things that's really delighted me, Huhana.
Kia ora, Gerard. And I mean, that's a really important kind of a change in the interface of what is considered taoka, what is valued. And I think from the work that, you know, the kaitahu leadership that you've been showing for all of what Te Waipounamu and all the hapu of that rohe. Look, I can say that because I'm an ex-senior curator up on the North Island, but the leadership that's been shown to really endorse place again is so incredibly critical for how we can see all of Aotearoa honouring the dusty. But I think it's also honouring, it was a kind of a legacy, I think at the time, archaeology of the time kind of in there, just, scraping up the kind of supposed detritus of, Māori occupation and then someone describing how that's going to be for the Māori future generations. And it's really up to you guys to revalue and redetermine what that language should be. And I just find that so beautiful about this project. And I think you also know, because I think in just my kind of involvement with it in the initial phases and then having to drop this project because I had to go and be a head of school. But in 2016, when the beginnings of that engagement and like showing people inside the area that most people don't go to. They don't go to the archaeology and see what's happening in the back spaces. So that beautiful project that happened at the Southern Museum about that creating a visible incursion into that space was really revealing. I kind of want to flip to Ron and Dale as well with the work that they're doing in this transdisciplinary project. But I remember Richard Anderson telling us about the boxes that this material was poured into. So in some respects, like pineapple boxes, or I'm trying to remember whether they were grapefruit boxes or pineapple or banana boxes or something, but this kind of relationship between the boxes that this material was put into and then what ended up in the Southland Museum really links in with what Aunty Dale and what Ron are doing as well in regards to that whole emphasis on understanding the kai content within this detritus. And I think it was really fascinating in 2016 when we actually saw those boxes are still the same boxes that Richard Anderson put in the back of the truck for that archaeologist back in the 60s. So there's a long trajectory to the story. But anyway, enough of that story. I think with what Ron and Dale are doing is, like you say, Gerard, is this exciting space to be in. So if Ron and Dale would like to tell us a little bit more about, we've been repacking the past, but we're also the Kai Hokai project that you guys are deeply engaged in at the moment. Would you like to tell a bit more about that?
Kia ora. Well, yeah, Ron Bullwood to start with. Sorry, Aunty Dale, if I jumped right in front of you there. But the Kai Hokai project is something that myself and Simon Kahn have been working on for a few years now. And the essence of that is to, I suppose, acknowledge the extraordinary, those wonderful artifacts of culture that we see usually at the front of the museum, and the front of the meeting house, if you will. To acknowledge that, but then also to say there's the mundane, everyday practice that sits in behind that actually holds the breadth of the conversations that usually centers around, well, where I'm from anyway, centers around food. That lighting a fire, that collecting food, that harvesting the fish, the shellfish, the birds, coming together at one time, meeting with the people around that fire and talking and preparing and sharing that kai together, and then leaving those bones, that detritus, as you said, in the ground. So, you know, the extraordinariness of landscape that feeds the mundane, everyday practice of eating, and how that narrative, that story, and the beautiful breath around that is captured in the waste products that are thrown into a hole that, you know, that an archaeologist will come and dig up in a few generations. So for us, it's that home that's captured in the stories and in the practices and in the gatherings. Does it be similar for yourself, Aunty Dale?
Very much so. It's exactly, you know, what we've experienced in the past for our ancestral knowledge that's been passed on, as well as what we're doing today. And, you know, middens, I know in Australia were just sort of like, they were considered the tip, the junk pile. And no one really understood that when you went down underneath those layers of all the ancestors who have eaten and hunted and gathered and, you know, as you said, shared stories, shared, you know, real life experiences, probably had a blue or two, probably, you know, laughed and played and all the rest of it as well. And it really, when you look into the midden, you actually see that some of those animals are not here in our waters today, and how they've been fished out. You know, everything's gone. And I think that's a big eye opener for the rest of the world to start realizing that you know, you can't just go out and be greedy. Yeah, you need to sustain and be aware of what you're hunting for, what you're gathering for. Yeah.
And that's a fantastic part. Alex, have you got a bit of a comment on that too? Because as the kind of architect and artist of bringing this all together.
That's absolutely huge, in the sense that I think, you know, we've probably been involved now over the years in processing 2,000 or 3,000 images, but within that there's been just so much bulk of stuff that is fish scales, the fish bones, these TT bones or the mutton bird bones, quite a big range. And I think that one of Gerard and I have talked a lot about the emotional layer to this mahi, because there's hard things about this midden and cultural material, the kaitahu, waitaha, kati mamoi material that's held in the museums. It's tough work in there to do what we're doing and to kind of connect and all of that. But the emotional layer that kind of keeps you going is actually tied to ecology, because this area of Tamatea and further south, it's been so rich, but it's also been deeply impacted by the colonial and neo-colonial impressions and interactions. And the kaimoana, or the seafood that's in that collection, is sequenced, and you can go back to some very early times. And I think Gerard may be talking about the settlement pattern, or the interaction in there is maybe interesting, but it is of concern. And then there's maybe something where we can work towards through this processing. There's some insight that could be gathered that could help show what was there in certain periods for the conversations that are to do with water quality. And even just things like with the fish bones, the otoliths in the ear, and Salmon was, you know, remarking how important they are, because they can indicate exactly what rivers some fish have been in. And so that whilst people maybe like Coots were interested in some of the human layers and maybe carved work and just different things that you can see, there's an interest in particular threads in the work. It's got a really strong sense that there's so much in that collection in terms of how much seafood, and it seems important because of the threats that hang over you know, all of this coastal ecology. So absolutely, yeah, there's a real reason to do the work.
Yeah, that's fantastic, with the numbers of years that it's taken to kind of roll this project out as well, and then the investigative work that's been going on and the richness that Gerard gets to kind of investigate. further. I mean, it's all for helping us with future planning as well. So, Gerard, what's your thought about that as you were kind of delving in further and finding more layers of material? You know, how are you feeling things for, you know, a future within that rohe, or what kind of information might help us, as Aunty Dale was saying, a better, more sustainable future, or ways and means of pulling back and taking only what we need? And, you know, what's your thought about that?
The archaeology is quite an interesting thing to be, an interesting lens to be looking at the past through. And one of the key things about the collection that we're working on is that those places down there were excavated by Peter Coates back in the 1960s, and in that time it was an very early study in economic archaeology in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And so that lens was very much focused on what were people eating, how much were they eating, what was their, if you like, mode of existence, the economy through which they survived. And I think it comes back to Aunty Dale's comment. It's sort of like, you know, when we look at those things now, we tend to have a much more emotional engagement with them. And certainly we can now look at those, those midden, and we can sort of reflect upon you know, this big pile of pawa shell, you know, this abalone, you know, huge big pile of it there. And suddenly it's like, wow, they were having a really good feed, you know, that would have been great, you know, especially nowadays where sort of our pawa has been, you know, severely impacted by the commercial take, and it's a bit of a rarity now for many of us. So when we look at what those old people were eating and we reflect on that, we don't have to sort of think, oh, here they were down at the bottom of Fiordland, down at the bottom of New Zealand, eking out a hard existence, you know. It mightn't have been all flash down there in a bit of a blow, but sort of at the same time, there's a lot of kai going being enjoyed there. There's a lot of engagement around that kai. And so with that, it's also those times of, you know, those sites, rather than just being the first footprint in terms of impact in the environment and that, they're also the first places where there was romance and love and you know, sort of the old argument, as Aunty Dale was saying, you know, all going on. And I think that's one of the things that we get to also reflect upon now with thinking about those places and just holding firm to that even though they might be, you know, a dusty pile of shells, those shells give us the avenue to reflect upon those other aspects of the old people's lives, and how that leads us forwards into questions of sustainability, our future engagement with the environment and so forth. I'm not so sure, but I do think it is, it's probably one of the cautions is not to be too fixated with ideas around our economic interpretation of who and what we are, but rather to think more broadly about who and what we are as people in place.
Yeah, ka pai, kia ora. And Alex, I know that when you were doing the initial kind of work in Southland Museum, it seemed kind of overwhelming in some respects as well. And so for your cohort who was working on that project, do you want to share a little bit more about, you know, from there, like maybe 2016 and through this process where you are now?
Sure.
Please.
I think going back to the very beginning, the project, as soon as Richard mentioned that how much boxes that he saw in the fieldwork part of Cooks's process that he recalled, so lots of wooden boxes is what Richard described going out of tamatea. And he said, oh, where did it go? And so even initially when I thought about reaching out to the museums, I thought, actually, am I the right person to do this? And that's actually when I contacted yourself and also then your recommendation to contact Mark Solomon, because I initially didn't feel like I was the right person to start that any kind of inquiry, because I'm an artist and we look at poetics, or so I was very tentative about it actually. But just with a little bit of that guidance and support, together we started and developed those kaupapa in the early days, the 4 kaupapa that the project runs on. And I think then, you know, it really came up early on about who should we work with, who should we reach out to, and in what order. And actually at that point then I was contacting some other artists and Arita Wilkinson, and it's like who you know, what pathways should we go, and contacted Pai Manu, and she actually mentioned Vicky Lenehan, and so someone who was an artist but had worked in the museological sector and kind of had that range. And so we tried to sort of put together a group of people thinking about it, and then we thought we need a bit of resource, because when the museums got back to me, it took a number of months, many months actually, to find out, because the museum staff, I think, had to go in further to find out what boxes were there, as it turned out, and there was no inventory of that. So it had been taken and it had been registered against Coots. It was known as the Coots collection, all of the material from the many sites, the 20 or more noho aku or rock shelters or seasonal camps that were excavated. And then from then, the project has been finding form and finding relationships and being guided by mana whenua from those very early days about what was important to work on next. And so, yeah, and, you know, yourself coming back after we did that first phase of work, where we spent 4 months with Vicky Lenehan and Laurie Bowers within SMAG, Southland Museum Neho o Te Taniwha, working on the collection. And we had to make a lot of adaptations. Initially, Southland Museum had wanted me to do like an art show and a video show. And I was sort of reflecting on Mātua Michael Scarrett's advice that the state of this collection was actually more important. And so I held back on any questions about video work and thought maybe we could flip. Oh, and the other difficulty is that this collection is so big, 300 boxes or more up in the top of the museum. There wasn't anywhere to work on the midden material of that scale within the work area of the museum. It was actually all around the edges, the 4 edges. And so that's where that adaptation, that art, because art spaces or exhibition spaces, they're just empty rooms. And so I said to David Dudfield, oh, well, yep, there's not much room in your storeroom, but what about down there in the exhibition spaces? Maybe the processing that Michael Scarrett is interested in could happen down there, and we could connect it with audience. And that's where everybody got together at that point. The members on the iwi liaison committee, we talked about what way we could do it. And then we made this adaptive sort of hybrid exhibition space. It was a work area. Vicky was working in there and they were processing. And then she was calling people as soon as material came up that was whatu or was woven. She would ring up on the weavers, or people, she just let people know via the grapevine. And she'll be talking about that part of the project, I guess, with Gerard later on in February, when more processing's been done. And so there'll be a whole discussion that happens around that inventorying work that's happening over the course of the 4 months, because we're in our 4th phase of it now, and Gerard's helped set up the new stage of that. So that'll be happening live during the APT.
Fantastic. No, amazing stuff. Ron, Bull and Dale, tell us more about some of the things that you're going to be kind of revealing to people at APT with the nature of your work. I mean, you're both really good cooks, apparently.
We try.
Maybe.
I think one of us is, and one does a lot of talking.
I'm the talker.
Well, with what we're attempting to do at APT is to look at that whole idea of landscape and how we view landscape as that central positioning factor of articulating identity. So of being on land and within a place, you know, for example, being in Tamatea, being in Dusky Sound, and how you feel when you're in that place, how you have that relationship with those mountains and with the, you know, with the islands that are in there, how that, you know, when you're in place, that your whakapapa, your linkages back through people that have been there through those footprints and doing that mundane practice of sitting around and having a feed, a fight and other things, You know, with all those mundane practices of day-to-day living and the connection that you have with those people going back through time, it's still living in that place. That air is still there, that breath is still there. So that when we go in and our hands interact with the food of that place, and we share the stories and that vital heart, that vital breath, that hoe, that essence of being in there, how that exists only in that place, that forms the identity that allows us to practice in a way that we do with and around food. And thinking, how do we actually lift those hands and lift that breath and that practice and bring it into a space that either A, our people are going to be in that haven't got the privilege to go to place at times, and B, how we can capture some of that heart and share it with people who haven't got that connection, but want to sort of understand what it means to be connected to land through practice and identity. So I think that's what we're doing, isn't it, Dale?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And look, when Australia was invaded and Aboriginal people were taken from their traditional homelands and put on other people's homelands, that became a real issue for the culture to continue and those practices. So it's taken a long time, you know, it's 39 years or something, that Aboriginal people have been under policies and procedures that govern the way that they hunt and gather and the way that they can practice what has been, you know, Indigenous knowledge for hundreds of thousands of years. So that's been very difficult. And it's been great because this project has actually got young Indigenous chefs like Chris and DJ and a few others around the place to actually start asking their elders, what did you do? Can you take me somewhere? Can you show me what that does? You know, what would you have done with it traditionally? So it's really opened up a lot of our young people's eyes and connection back to place. And I think what Chris does is he really makes a beautiful, I don't know, he makes it fancy, he puts the modern twist on it, but using our ancient herbs, spices, etc. And it's a joy to watch him grow and to acknowledge his heritage, because he has been on the hunt for his heritage. A lot of our people have been, you know, taken away from that through the stolen generation, etc. And this has been a really good way for him to reconnect. So yes, I'm very, very proud of what you're all doing and and I just see the synergies that come between both our lands, you know.
I mean, that's absolutely fantastic, that whole notion of like overcoming disassociation to place. And I mean, that's a long legacy and that's had a long tail, and it's had a traumatic impact, you know, on not only your Indigenous communities, but also iwi and hapu and Aotearoa, especially when, and then with Alex's previous work on fresh water and, you know, the Rena and, you know, all sorts of things, the environmental impacts are taking any person, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, away from that ability to be able to feed themselves and sustain themselves well. I mean, this is a fantastic, multi-layered, multifaceted investigation into what it is about people. Be connected, slow yourself down, be connected to place, and actually understand how to feed yourself from place. I love what you're doing from an Indigenous knowledge perspective. I think that's really, really critical. And I'm kind of turning back to someone like, you know, Gerard, is there anything in, you know, like, as you know, you're going to be doing a whole lot of further incursions into this collection, because I just thought while you were talking, I would go back to my photo box in my photos and actually look up the 2016 photos when we were in that collection. And there are shoot loads of boxes. There are a lot of boxes of material. Are there boxes that haven't been opened yet?
Absolutely. There are lots of boxes, and within each box there's a whole lot of bags, and within each bag there's more paper bags full of partially sorted collection material. Some of it's very well sorted already, you know, down into the different categories of, be it different species of shellfish or different, you know, here's the fish bone, here's the bird bone, here's the particular species of bird bone. Other parts of it are not less, much less sorted. And one of the things with it is there's a lot of boxes yet to be sorted through. Those that the collections partially, most of it's in the Southland Museum down in Invercargill. Other parts of it are here at the Otago Museum. And so we'll be taking some of the boxes from the Otago Museum across to the university here, the laboratories in the university. And from there, we'll carry on some of that sorting process and beam it in live stream to APT over there in Brisbane, so that there's a moment of that sort of continuation of that. You know, while we can't be in the gallery, we can at least beam in momentarily. But as we explore those boxes, one of the things with archaeology is it's always changing. Every year we find new analytical techniques. We have new theoretical ways of approaching it. So where Coates was very much focused on the economics and counting the shells, and from that working out how many calories people needed to survive through a day or a week or whatever, or a season down there. The work we're doing is very much more sort of like reconnecting with that material and creating opportunities for our wider iwi, our wider whānau to reconnect with our wider tribal communities to reconnect with that material, and in themselves start to redefine what it is that they're interested in from these collections. And that will also shift if we do have an opportunity to, you know, go on a voyage background to Fiordland and take some of our whānau back to those places where they can sort of reconnect with the place in one way. But it's as much as anything, it's about the story and recognising those stories emerge. So one of the things that we from an archaeological point of view that we're really excited about is there's more bone there than their middens, and the more, as we understand it, went extinct very early on after our old people arrived in New Zealand. One of the things we'd really like to test out of the Coates collection of archaeology is whether or not the more over in Fiordland actually do stack up and support the rapid extinction of more early on, or did they perhaps survive a little bit later down in Fiordland?
Well, we're looking forward to reading your report about all of this at some stage, Gerard. Anyway, the synthesis of this in some respects. And Alex Monteith, you know, to you too, a fantastic catalysing from a story, from the essence of a story, and a bit of indignation about how could that have happened? But that was the 1960s, and that's what happened in the 1960s. The enabling, but albeit a little cautious enabling. I think some of the people were a little upset that someone was going into these spaces where they had been looking for kakapo and getting a little upset about someone from Australia doing that too. Love and respect, Auntie, but sometimes you get that little, you know, Aotearoa, New Zealand, Australian kind of rivalry. But anyway, not that we really should be doing that from an Indigenous knowledge perspective, it's very connected. But anyway, in saying that, that was another part of the story, but that was another artwork. Hey, Alex, so you've done that one. Look, if we come back, if we wrap this around, such a rich project of many minds coming together, this co-intelligence that is just so rich with opportunity and so rich, not only in its endeavour and its ambitiousness from the beginning. It's a big project to get through all those boxes, because just like I said, I just looked at the photos before and there was a lot hidden in that space and they literally had not been opened. Now, there was some beautiful revelations too. Hey, Alex, there was some, you know, we talked a little bit more about possibly the hierarchy of talka, you know, the carved kind of obviously, you know, all the handmade sandals and that kind of thing, you know, the object that people can see rather than this notion of all this material at the base of a cave, for example. But for you at the time, Alex, that was a pretty amazing kind of like OMG moment. That was a really amazing, the modi of the talka that did reveal themselves was pretty impressive. And that was very important for people of place to engage with those talkas. So maybe you and Gerard can respond to those particular, because I've just pulled up the pictures going, oh yeah, that's right. I remember those particularly significant finds and how collection managers or the experts like with Whiti, how they house them, how they generate care for these items that were found. And that was particularly the, whether it's a taumata atua or whether it's, you know, the carved head or whether the sandals, but maybe you might want to just talk quickly about that as well, if that's all right.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, Huhana, you were mentioning that rako atua, the carved head form, which Coates had identified. So during the original work within the museum, as I understood it, at Southland Museum, Neho Te Taniwha, they had 7 items quite clearly inventoried that could be accessed from that period of excavation. And the rako atua was one of those that Coates and the museum had done at that early time. But everything else in the 300 boxes either hadn't been opened or had been sort of brought into the museum and identified as part of the Fiordland excavations, and then had sort of sat in that storage area. So after the first stage of processing, which David Dudfield and the museum thought that it would take just that 3 months with 2 people working permanently on it, that would complete it. And in that work, a lot of those beautiful fish hooks, Gerard, the power fish hooks, there's those composite fish hooks, which one of them's made of moa bone. Those had emerged, and then Vicky and Laurie had then been making beautiful encasements for those to make sure that they were earthquake proof and could then be re-accessed by other kaitahu researchers and what have you. And so you could see the hierarchy in terms of what had been taken care of, and that the sort of masses of fish scales and even some of the bigger bags of stone hadn't been opened, just heavy. Ethel picked those up and opened them, and they were all in the original, looked like what Coates had sort of dropped there. But you know, that thinking of kai and cooking in the 700 years ago or time ago, or generations on the time of Tamatea, or then the next ones that were in there, it just seemed the poetics, the whakapapa, yeah, it just seemed so sort of interesting. And the difficulty with the archaeological collections is their scale, and the other difficulty is the nature of the narration, I guess, that happened in that modern archaeological period in the 70s. And the thing that intrigued me and what Gerard talked about with actually Brian Ellingham, another archaeologist, yeah, is to do with what's not evident in archaeological collections, and that's the subtler remains that you can't see tuna, you can't see eel, and you can't see some of the carbohydrate and content. And that's where, you know, Ron and Dale's mahi and what they're bringing, the discussions and the richness and the sort of excitement and connection that they're bringing through kai, because that you can see all the culture when you have those food events. You can see everybody bantering, you can see all the things that happen around kai, and if you just look at the midden that's left over after one of the events, you can't always see all those stories, the banter, you know. And I was really feeling that in relation to the collection as well, that the way that it had been, things had been accounted for had been quite mathematical. And so yeah, that's, yeah, just some thoughts around that.
Amazing. And I really, yeah, I really do firmly believe this is a very amazing project, which is going to have, well, I think it's going to resonate for other, I can see Aunty, I can see Dale nodding there, but this is a project that resonates for how we can re-engage and renew and re-look at ourselves in relationship to these incredible collections. And in some respects, while a lot of us felt that kind of pain of how this collection came into being, there's a pain that comes with that, and even a sense of trauma of places being interfered with, or because that's what has happened. So we've been growing up and having an adult conversation here. There's a lot of pain in that area as well. So I think you mentioned about the emotion, and as Ron's been saying about that hau, that essence, that modi, that's really what this project is all about, manifesting people's engagement to feel and be feeling in place again, for their own well-being. So I mean, I'm getting goosebumps here just sitting, having a Zoom meeting with you guys about the incredible potential that's coming out of this project. That is seriously resonating. Yeah, so I'm sorry we can't be in, is it Mianjin? I'm sorry we can't be there to experience the kind of the hau of what you're presenting to, Alex. That's a bit of a sadness. But I think ultimately with what you are going to manifest and make happen is going to be equally as rich. And then maybe in time, Queensland opens up a little bit more and New Zealand reconnects, and we all quickly flit over there before we have to scuttle back. But would anyone like to make some further comments? Dale, as our kind of lead for today with the role that you play for acknowledging country for us, is there something else you would like to add, or is there anyone else want to add before Aunty Dale might finish for us? Ron?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just adding a small comment. When I think about the exhibition and I think about the installation at the gallery, when I think about the stuff that Coots collected and is sitting in various museums in different places, and I sort of conceptualize and think about the people whose hands and whose breath is going to be shared over that material in those places, I've got a real deep sense of sadness, of dislocation. Insofar as our people have to go to a museum or an art gallery to interact with place. Whereas what we dearly love to do is put our feet on the ground and our hands into the, whatever's there, if it's dry and dusty or if it's wet and mucky, and to feel that place and to breathe the air that our old people breathe, and to actually add to the midden. And that's one thing that I really feel sad, is that the midden of those special places is being investigated and being disturbed, but at times it's not being added to. Our whakapapa, our stories are being paused in those places. How do we actually re-engage with place and add to that midden? How do we add our breath, our heart into that? Yeah.
Well, maybe that's another incursion. That's another coastal flow. That's another thing that needs to happen from, full circle again and go back to place and return. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. But anyway, Gerard, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, kia ora. Because while I've got I absolutely agree with Ron's whakaaro. On one side, this kind of project is always, sort of doing the yin and yang thing and tugging each way, because on the other side of it, what we have is we've got these, so often when we do look at the archaeology, it is looking at very much the thing, the archaeology that's, be it the midden or the particular taonga that are on display or something else. And one of the lovely things about this project is with the installation, with Alex's video artworks and that, we've got the place, at least a representation, an interpretation, an emotional response to those places brought visually into the interconnection with those taonga, with the archaeology as well. And that's something that, sort of quite often in an archaeological display, you'll you'll see kind of like there'll be a representation of a place, there'll be a backdrop of a map or an archaeological diagram or something of that ilk, but to actually sort of see the an aspect of those places as interpreted, through the artwork, through the video, it does actually sort of add a lot more life and emotional invigoration to the archaeologies, to the midden and the other taonga that are there, which I think is actually a really neat aspect of this project, and for those whānau who are removed or are distant from the south. Certainly, absolutely, if we can be there, if we can touch those places, if we can put our feet in those places, there's nothing like it. And as an archaeologist, as an iwi archaeologist, I feel humbled and privileged every time I get to do that. But at the same time, I'm also very humbled by the fact that we've been able to be involved in this kind of artistic endeavour, and actually giving a bit more life than what our technical archaeological reports normally do. So he mihi kia koutou mō tēnā.
Yeah. Ngā mihi, Gerard. Ngā mihi.
Well, I was just thinking about, like, I'm looking out the window here and the Brisbane River is outside the window. And even though we're talking about shellfish and what happens in those middens, we have middens here which are freshwater midden. So different animals from the water and that sort of thing. And I was yarning with someone the other day, and they were telling me about the fish that used to come down from the top end and come through their space, and they'd be able to just gather them and have a big feast. And see, here you can't do that anymore. When I was a kid, you used to be able to just walk down the road and pick oysters off the rocks and have a good old feed. And that, I think, is what's missing from our lives, our young children's lives now for the future. So it makes me, and you guys all talking about, the archaeology stuff and things, makes me want to go and rummage through our museum and see what's hidden in the back there, and see what's there.
Up all round there. I'm sure I could rustle up a few students, Gerard, we're over getting hand. But look, ngā mihi atu ki a koutou, it's amazing kōrero and really astounding responses to this project. Congratulations, Alex. Koutou mā, Ron and Dale and Gerard, for your expertise there. I'm just going to ask one more question, Alex. Do you think our man's going to come and have a look?
That's a good question.
Should
we? Yeah, good question. So Huhana's talking there about Peter Coots. So we have reached out and had some contact. And look, I think Gerard and Ethel and I've always felt there's been an aspect about this that was quite difficult timing wise, because the project in its beginnings, there was some sense you could, from David Dudfield in the Southern Museum, that you could work through the collection and be able to, we were working towards trying to get a sense of everything that they held, so that Matua Michael Skerritt and Matua Stuart Bull could appraise and consider what that meant for, and other ones that were there, Tare Bradshaw in the early time, and the other ones on the iwi liaison committee. And then, of course, we got to the end of that 3 months, and it was the scale of what remained at that work rate. Sort of, we looked ahead, and there was just more, and we're on the 4th phase. And as Rachel Wesley mentioned on our last work done at the Dunedin Public Art Gallery, when they started opening the Otago Museum boxes that were held there, they were really detailed and intricate. Gerard mentioned the boxes that had bags in them, and there would be 80 bags within one box. Wow. And then that's so what that's meant is forming the questions that you would ask Coots, what may have to be done partway through this process. And so I think that there may be, now we're at a point where together those questions could be formed and posed. Yeah.
Ngā mea te.
That's a long, there was one thing that I wanted to ask as well at the stage, which was to ask Dale and Ron what they're on their third or so feast. And when Dale was talking about in project planning in the very early stages, one of the things I found absolutely stunning was some of the work that she had done previously, which was past, present and future in terms of those concepts through the kai. And just wondered if you'd talk a little bit about your menu and the kai that you've done so far within the Kai Ho Kai project, and just yeah, what's ahead. Same with Ron.
We've been working with young Chris, as I said before, an Indigenous chef, and some of the food that we're looking at sharing next week will be, of course, we love cooking on the coals, as everyone does, and we love to sit around a fire and, you know, have a good old yarn. So we've got a fire pit going. We're going to do some oysters. We're going to do some whole fish. We'll be using all of those succulents and all those sea vegetables that actually grow on country in along the waterways and stuff. So Chris has been out foraging them. He's probably going to turn them into some lovely oil or dust or something that he does. Then we're also looking at, because of dietary requirements, I have to look at all that as well. So I'm actually going to do a kangaroo tail soup and have on the pot, and we're going to have a few things, other bones in there as well, we're going to do that. We call it Johnny cakes. I'm not sure what you guys call it, flatbread. Johnny cakes. We're going to do that again because everyone was called.
It's not quite doughboys. These are cooked on fire, like you know, doughboys tend to go into a boiler, eh?
Okay. Yeah, so these are smashed out and people get to do that themselves, and we're going to be cooking them over the fire as well, and having some very rare native bee honey and that with them. So it'll be nice.
Very. You don't want any white cockapoo olive oil with that, do you? I know it's not quite, it's a bit Italian really, but yeah. We grow that in Kuku actually. Shameless hustling for our olive oil. Never mind. But ngā mihi ati ki a koutou me o koutou kōrero rangatira mō tātou. What a chiefly conversation that was. And I think we need to hand over to Chief Dale as well, just to close us off. We're all manawhiri beaming into your beautiful place. So does that seem appropriate, Gerard? No, just checking.
Yeah, look, I acknowledge that what we're doing here is going to be I think, really grounding for our young people and even for our elders that are coming on the evening, because all of the ones that are coming are actually worked in health and education, and that's part of what they want to do. They want to continue what our old people have taught us over the years and continue that relationship and passing it on to the young ones. So I'm really privileged to be part of the journey with you all, and I hope that we can take it past 2022 and continue it further into the future as a real good relationship with yourselves and Australians.